Hello, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the weekly show about retro video games where your host, Dave, picks an English language game from the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, or 32X, and then we do a deep dive looking at the history of the game, alternate versions, the package, including the box, manual, and possibly other inclusions, and finally showcase gameplay from the game before giving a final score on a scale that goes from 0 stars or a bomb rating all the way up to a so far mythical 5-star rating that's reserved for truly the best of the best. So far I haven't handed out one of those 5-star ratings yet, though through 118 previous episodes covering 122 games, but I'm not messing with you all. I'm expecting by the time I'm done going through the list of 1,275 titles, give or take a few, there will probably be 5 or 10 or so that end up with that rating. I just haven't gotten any on the schedule yet. Along with all these review videos, I also do other special videos from time to time, such as my recent video comparing the RetroTink 5X to the FrameMeister for those of you out there possibly being curious about real-world differences between the two. And I always do year-end up wrap-up videos as well to document the progress through this very large library. So if that sort of thing interests you, I recommend that you subscribe and tell a friend. I'm going to continue to do this channel until I'm completed this insane task, and if I never get another subscriber beyond the current 127 that are signed up, and thank you, by the way, I'll be perfectly happy. But I would like for as many people that are interested to be able to see these reviews. Okay, now that all that's out of the way, let's get to this week's contestant. I've had a lot of sports games hit the schedule recently, which is gonna happen when you're looking at the Genesis library, but I'd also had a lot of games that are based on known licensed properties like Tom and Jerry, Monopoly, and Carmen Sandiego, to name a few. And those games are all fine and dandy, well, except when they suck, but that's another story. But this library also has its share of lesser known titles, or titles that maybe were popular 30 years ago, but have been since somewhat forgotten about as newer consoles have focused on other franchises. So for this week, since I didn't have a sequel to an existing game penciled in the slot, I decided to pull out something that was fairly obscure, even to me, someone who's been around video games for almost his entire life. And yes, that is a long time. This week's game is for the Genesis, or Mega Drive, and it's the port of the arcade game DJ Boy from Coneco. DJ Boy originally released in the arcades in September of 1989, and then made its way to the United States in an altered fashion that we'll get into more details about further in the review. DJ Boy is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that was trying to feed off the popularity of the genre in the arcades at the time, fueled by other hits like Double Dragon and Crime Fighters, but that definitely manages to put its own spin on things as well. It's a somewhat rare arcade game in the United States, but it did well enough in Japan to have a sequel produced there called B-Rat Boys a few years later in 1992. However, unlike DJ Boy, B-Rat Boys was never ported to any console or localized for English-speaking regions. So how good is DJ Boy to begin with, and how accurate is the port to the Genesis? And do the edits make the game more palatable to a US audience, improve the game, or just make it weirder? Spoiler alert, it is pretty weird. There's no mistaking that this game is an 80s Japanese take on American culture, so you can probably imagine some of what's included. But you won't have to imagine for long, as we'll get right to that after our customary look at the package. And this is my copy of DJ Boy, which I'm very happy to say is in pretty great condition. I got this on eBay a few years ago, I think after seeing a copy locally that didn't have the manual. But as soon as I saw that copy in person, I was like, I've got to have that. And thankfully it wasn't very expensive, probably for reasons we'll get into shortly. The clamshell in this case is pristine, with no scratches, dings, or tears anywhere, and about my only complaint is that the hang tab has been pretty roughly removed. This is one that I'll need to come back to and take a Dremel to it or something to smooth that out. To go along with the outer cover, the inner cover is in fantastic shape as well, at least as far as how well the image quality is held up. There's no sun bleaching or ink bleeding due to the water damage anywhere, and the inner cover has managed to stay in place and not get roughed up at either the top or the bottom edge. However, while it doesn't appear to have any ink bleeding, if you look closely, you can see some minor wrinkling on the front and the spine, so maybe a tiny bit of moisture might have gotten in there. But you're not going to see that unless you're looking super close. Let's move on to the cover art, and DJ Boy is very unique in that regard. DJ Boy came out in the United States in mid-1990 and was one of the earliest third-party releases for the Genesis, and as you might expect was Kaneko's first Genesis release. I bring this up because at the time, Sega was still very much using the black cross-hatching format for the covers of their games, and as a result, DJ Boy stands out in stark contrast to those covers. It's a breath of fresh air, really, and I actually like those black covers, but this looks fantastic, with the DJ Boy logo at the top, and then this artwork inspired by the game. Even the spine stands out with the red, white, and blue. There's no mistaking this game when it sits on your shelf. Flipping over the back, and this is where I've got some concerns, for reasons that should be obvious. First off, we've got another bit of art of DJ Boy himself holding up some sort of hand signal. I don't know what this is supposed to mean with the thumb and index and middle finger held up. I assume this is just supposed to be the V for victory / peace thing, but having the thumb out makes it confusing. But that's just minor compared to the other two issues, which is the lack of any kind of flavor text and no screenshots. I'm not sure what they were thinking here, and wouldn't be surprised if after this, Sega told all the third parties, hey, you need to at least somewhat conform to a standard design. Because as cool as the front cover looks, this is total amateur hour back here. Kaneko's next release, Airbuster, has a much more normal rear cover, so this was clearly just an early release issue. One last thing, it looks like Kaneko's US headquarters was just a bit northeast of me in Buffalo Grove, a suburb of Chicago. And I mention that because Buffalo Grove was also where Konami's US headquarters was for years, less than a mile away. Kind of crazy that they were that close together, and I might have to go on a road trip up there and shoot some video of what they look like today. Opening up the case, and the cartridge and manual are both in fantastic shape. It's not mint, but it's damn good. The manual is okay, and does a decent job of explaining the game, as simple as it is. At very least, the manual includes some screenshots detailing the game's power-ups and levels, which makes their absence on the rear cover all the more confusing. Unfortunately, when you take a close look at the text of the manual, though, they clearly could have used a better copywriter, with some obvious slip-ups like confusingly referring to the A button as the C button, and where DJ Boy refers to his girlfriend, you know the one the whole plot of the game revolves around, as Maris instead of Maria. Okay, that's the somewhat odd package for DJ Boy. Let's get to the game itself and see just how crazy things get. Before we really get into the game, I want to talk a bit about the localization efforts, not just in bringing the arcade game from Japan to the United States, but also the changes made in porting the game to the Genesis. The original arcade game story of DJ Boy is a bit different than what we got on the Genesis. In the arcade version, you aren't fighting the Dark Knight's roller gang because they kidnapped your girlfriend, you're fighting them because they stole your boombox. No, I'm not joking, and honestly, I think I like that plot better because it's much more unique than simply trying to get your girlfriend back. In fact, let's see, a beat-em-up where your girlfriend is kidnapped at the beginning and you have to fight through a gang to rescue her. Where have I seen that before? Oh, only in 1988 and 1989's highest-grossing arcade game, Double Dragon, maybe. And to further illustrate how lazy this was, your girlfriend in Double Dragon? Marion versus Maria in the ported DJ Boy. Also, the gang you fight against in Double Dragon? The Black Warriors versus the Dark Knights in DJ Boy. Now, I understand that Kaneko probably had some translation issues in creating an English version, but seriously, there wasn't one person in that Buffalo Grove office that had played Double Dragon that could raise their hand and say, hey guys, we need to change these two names to, I don't know, anything else so we don't sound like we're copying the most popular arcade series going right now? Anyway, let's move on. As I said, in the original arcade version, music plays a more prominent role as the roller skating aspect and boombox recovery gives the game more of a breakdancing urban feel. And to play up the name of the game, it includes an actual DJ. For the Japanese version, the DJ used was a guy named Demon Kaka, or Demon Kogur at the time, who I wasn't familiar with before doing this review. But apparently he's quite well known in Japan, starting out being the singer in a heavy metal band named Sigma 2 before going solo along with working as a radio and, get this, sumo announcer. So, what does this DJ do? Well, in terms of gameplay, not much. And as it turns out, with the demon only making a brief appearance at the start of the game where he flies in and spray paints the DJ Boy logo on the title screen. Well, why even bring it up then? Well, because in the US version, while the graphics remained of Demon Kaka, Kaneko replaced the voice samples from Demon with those of Wolfman Jack, the legendary American DJ known for his raspy voice, making the game very interesting to listen to, especially in 1989, when digital voice samples in video games were very few and far between. To pull this off, the original arcade board included not only a Yamaha 2203 for sound processing, but also an Oki 6295 specifically for speech synthesis. The Genesis, of course, doesn't have an Oki 6295, and as a result, Demon Kaka / Wolfman Jack was excluded from the home port to coincide with the change in story from the arcade version. This, of course, isn't the only change from the arcade version to the home version. The arcade version also supports 2 players, while the Genesis version only allows 1. And I'll go into more detail on this next bit in the control section, but the combat in the arcade version flows better, with DJ Boy actually being able to string together combinations of attack moves, whereas the home version is much more basic, with only rudimentary punches and kicks being available. But it's not all bad. In the arcade version, you collect music notes from downed enemies to go along with the arcade's more musical theme. In the home version, you instead collect money, which is used for purchasing items at a shop between the levels, such as health, extra lives, and items to make you stronger, faster, and tougher. This gives the game a slight River City Ransom feel, or really any game with an in-game shop like Forgotten Worlds or Xenocrisis. Also, in the arcade version, DJ Boy doesn't have a health bar, and if he's knocked down, he loses a life. The Genesis version remedies this by adding a health bar that gets longer with each level, and certain characters will drop hamburgers during the level, allowing you to return to full health. On the flip side, you start the game with only 1 life, and extra lives are very expensive at the shop, but I think overall the alternate life health system is a net positive for the home version. Between the Japanese Mega Drive and Genesis versions, there are some significant differences as well. For an in-depth analysis of those differences, Nefarious Wes has a great video about that, and I'll link it in the description. But for our purposes, I'll just mention some of the highlights. The first, and one that probably everyone focuses on, especially in 2021, is the inclusion of a pretty infamous first boss, Big Mama. Big Mama in the Japanese version is an offensive black character, and to add insult to injury, Big Mama has a farting attack. Yeah, stay classy, Japan. In the US version, the character wasn't removed, but the skin color was lightened, and Big Mama no longer farts, but instead throws pies periodically. This is a problem to a lesser degree with the last boss as well, and again the skin color had to be modified to the US version to try and smooth things out. There's lots of other differences as well between the versions, such as the spotlight effect used in the second level, and the third level being almost totally different, just with a similar theme and enemies. But like I said, go take a look at that Nefarious Wes video for more details. You wouldn't be wrong to want to play both versions of the game to get the full DJ Boy experience though. Okay, that's enough about the differences between the various versions of the game. Let's concentrate on what you actually get with the Genesis version for a bit. From a base perspective, DJ Boy on Genesis is a single-player side-scrolling beat-em-up that has 6 levels, up 1 from the arcade version's 5, although technically the last level is just a showdown with the game's final boss. The game is only single-player, as previously mentioned, and there's not many other options to speak of, except for the choice between easy and normal mode and a sound test. There's also not any hidden codes for the game, so if you want to see the ending, you'll have to either get good or pick up a Game Genie. And here's where I should probably discuss the game's difficulty. First off, if you really want to try out DJ Boy, play it in easy. Just trust me on this. During gameplay, the average enemies that you skate around and beat down are easy enough to take care of, especially with practice. However, the problem comes at any time a boss hits.
bosses will usually have more health than you, especially in the beginning of the game, and they hit hard, with most attacks taking off a full unit of health. Also, without a specific strategy like standing in place and hoping for them to walk into your jump kick, attacking them in a normal manner is just going to get you to the game over screen quicker. This is compounded by the fact that on level 5, you have to go through a traditional boss rush, and if you thought dealing with one boss was bad enough, just imagine having to fight 5 in a row. Now, I understand that the design of the game in the Genesis version is for you to go to the shop and power up between levels, but with only one life at the beginning of the game, chances are you might not make it to the shop to power up before wiping. The controls of the game mirror the arcade version somewhat, with buttons being present for punching, kicking, and jumping. I say somewhat because, as mentioned earlier, they're definitely a simplified version of the combat system used in the arcade version. I don't specifically mind the simplified punching and kicking. It certainly gets the job done, but it pales in comparison to other beat-em-ups. A bigger issue for me is that jump kick, which just doesn't work. It works somewhat if you jump straight up and hope for an enemy just to walk into your skate, as in that boss strategy I just mentioned, but even then you have to time it just right, and it's pretty useless when skating through a level normally. I get that DJ Boy is based on a relatively simple arcade game, but paring the combat system down even further seems unnecessary, and definitely hurts the already limited fun factor of the game. I'm assuming that part of the reason why the combat was simplified was due to the port being very economical about the characters' animation frames. And that's a very nice way of saying that the sprites, while appearing decent and retaining the overall look from the arcade version, minus some detail, have even less frames of animation than the original game, which was already just average in that department. I actually don't mind the art in DJ Boy. It does look similar to the arcade version, while not being a one-to-one copy. You can easily compare the level backgrounds and characters with the understanding that you simply weren't going to get a pixel-perfect version crammed into 4 megabits in 1990. And in fact, I'd say the graphics are the best part of the game, despite the detail and animation limitations. The sound, on the other hand, is totally forgettable, and of course this is even more disappointing considering the arcade original's awesome voice samples. The music in the arcade version isn't anything special, but it's certainly better than the very basic soundtrack provided on the Genesis port. And the same goes for the sound effects. At least in the arcade version, the sound effects had some punch and clarity to them. I know DJ Boy is a relatively early Genesis title, but there's nothing from an audio standpoint here that couldn't have been on the Master System. All in all, DJ Boy is simply disappointing, which is almost worse than being bad. And make no mistake, it's bad too. But had this been a more authentic port, it would have at least shined on the Genesis as a totally original title in the beat-em-up genre, especially at that point in time. Instead, it's just one of those obscure early third-party Genesis titles that's really only worth picking up if you're a collector, and as a result, I'm giving it 1 star. Only the obsessive beat-em-up fan or the morbidly curious need apply here.
Okay, that was DJ Boy. This was definitely an interesting experience doing this research for this past week, and probably far more than it should have been for a relatively simple game. I had no idea when I picked out DJ Boy to play this week that I was going to run into Wolfman Jack, racist tropes that were out of place even 30 years ago, and a heavy metal sumo announcer. But this is what makes the channel enjoyable, even when the actual game for that week is a turd that would have made a disappointing rental back in the day. Next week on Zilog and Moto, we're staying on the Genesis, and I'm reviewing a game that I picked up in Orlando, Florida during a week when I visited Disney World a few years ago. One of the things that I enjoy about going on trips is checking out the local retro shops and seeing what's in the area that I normally wouldn't know about. And this visit did not disappoint. I think I ended up picking up this game, which is somewhat uncommon, and about 10 others. I might have spent more there than at Disney. And it's just crazy talk. But it was close. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video. And remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.